Hello and welcome to the next video in the Kinetic Data Platform training series. My name is Derek Larson, and in this set of videos now we're going to start talking about our workflow or back-end process. So the first thing we'd like to do is start to talk a little bit about vocabulary. So one of the basic concepts for our back-end processing is the task engine. That's what does all the processing, and it essentially does two things. The easiest way to think about it. The first is that it waits for a trigger. So a trigger is something that's generated by an external system. In our case, it's most likely from the submission of a form, our cleaning request form, for example. And then once it grabs that trigger, it matches it up with a tree or a process and runs the tree. So it's a very oversimplified way to think about things, but that's essentially what the task engine is doing. The more complex piece there, of course, is running the tree. So every tree, a task tree or a tree, is made up of two parts. The first is a node. So a node on a tree is a representation of a handler or a task handler that does some kind of process. Now, this could be something like send an email, change a CSV list into JSON, or even something as complex as submit an incident ticket or order a piece of equipment from an external vendor. So let's actually take a look at this while we're talking about it. So right now I'm in the space for your Kinetic platform, and I have the global workflow consoles presented. And so we're going to take a look at the account password reset that we've taken a look at before. If we open up the builder here, this is a representation of a tree, and each one of these boxes here is a node and represents a handler or some kind of process. The other piece that is part of a tree is a connector. So it's one of the most aptly named things we have in the application because it essentially connects two different nodes. And each one of these connectors can have a qualification on it that you can evaluate to decide if you should process down that connector itself. So that could lead to different branches on your tree, like this one here. Now, if we take a look at one of the nodes here, I think we've taken a look at this one before. So this one sends an email. It uses a template. It brings in information. It also represents something that's very common in the application, and that's called a routine. So a routine is a repeatable set of actions. Essentially, it's a tree within a tree, and it accepts its own inputs. It has its own outputs, or what we call results, that are passed back. So a notification is a very common example. Also something like an approval that is going to have inputs but do the same process, or perhaps creating a fulfillment task. Once again, having similar input values that could be there, and then a similar process inside of it, but the results on it depend upon what you're giving to the routine itself. And we'll talk about routines in a lot more detail in a couple of videos. So that's a basic representation of a tree with its nodes and connectors. I did want to spend a little bit of time looking at a couple of other consoles that we really won't spend a lot of time with after this, but you may want to know where they are. So the first one is what happens when things go wrong. So there's two places to look. The first is we'll see errors here, and I shouldn't have any. This is a brand new system. So if there's an error with a specific node on a tree or a handler, you'll see something here. The other place you can go for information is into the logs. And each log has some information about it here, each log entry, I should say. You want to do some searching in the message to get some specifics or to follow your tree if you're wondering about a process. And the other things I want to take a look at, these are just ones I want to show right away, and we probably won't come back to them. So under plugins, I talked about task handlers behind nodes. Those are all listed here. So, and the details of them are going to be behind the scenes here. You'll see a lot of those, and if you need to add any to your own specific system, this is where you would go to do that. And the other piece is just some bookkeeping or some administrative pieces for the workflow engine, and that's under space, and then settings, and then of course workflow over here. The engine is an asynchronous process in the most part. It essentially doesn't do things exactly when it receives triggers. It has a timing piece, so you can make changes to that here. You can start and stop the engine. There's also some other options here for policy rules. You can take a look at any licensing or system errors here. Very unlikely that you would go in to make any changes here when you're using our KinOps solution. All right, well, that's the basics of the tree and some vocabulary and so forth. And so in the next video, we're going to get into creating our tree, adding some workflow and nodes and connectors onto that. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.